Hello and welcome to Fit After 40. At the time of this recording, the last frost date in Tennessee is less than a week away, meaning it is time to start planting the garden. Gardening has long been correlated with good health and longevity. In fact, if you read the book, The Blue Zones, Dan Buettner notes that people who live in these areas where people do enjoy unusually long lifespans, that most of these people keep a garden. It keeps you active, it reduces stress, and of course, if you're growing more vegetables, you tend to eat more vegetables. So all good things, I think. So our guest today is Joy Bevin of Wonder Gift and Garden, here to talk with us about gardening. Joy, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's Bovin, Boven,
Oh,
and
pardon
that's,
me, Bovin.
yeah, and
Excuse me.
it's Dutch. I feel like it's in my blood to be in horticulture and be amongst the plants and be
Absolutely.
outside.
Absolutely. Tulips, right?
Yeah.
So let's speak as if we've never planted a garden before. Of course, the first thing you've got to figure out is where to put it. So what should we think about when we are planning a garden?
So first off, you want to know where north, south, east, west are and get
Mhm.
familiar with that. A lot of people who move into new homes, I recommend that they don't do a whole lot for the first year because they want to know what's going on for every season in their yard and where the sun is and where the shade is
Mhm.
and what's wet, what's dry, what seems to be problem areas and being able to identify all the plants that exist within their yard before moving forward, either taking things out or putting things in.
Let's start with sun exposure. When we're looking at the amount of sunlight, now you may pick up a pack of seeds and it says full sun, partial sun, shade. What does full sun mean? How many hours of sunlight are we talking about for those big categories?
You're right. So it's not a easy I think it's often oversimplified within the nursery industry as to what full sun and full shade are because there's a million variables that come into play. And so with our garden center, Wonder Gift and Garden, I have tried to use the terminology meadow and woodland or woodland edge or wet meadow or rain garden area or stream bank so that people can kind of have a little bit better understanding. Say if they have a slope that faces east, that means that it's half day, it's about 6 hours or maybe even a little bit less for them to be working with, so they can look at their tags and information and go from there. And so yes, technically full sun is 6 hours or more, but dry full sun is different than wet full sun.
And when we're talking about dry and wet, you mentioned a slope. Obviously, that's going to increase the drainage. But how do we need to plan for the orientation of the land itself and for water specifically?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another thing you want to be paying attention to with your property is how does the rain fall? I owned a house for a couple of years. I don't live there anymore, but drainage was a huge issue, and drainage
Mhm.
in general in Nashville is a really big problem. We're not thinking big picture about the kind of individual choices we make. We just kind of want the rain to go off our property, but that's creating a bigger problem. So looking at your property and thinking, how can I catch some of this before it runs off into our waterways?
Mhm.
And that's why there's so many more people focusing on rain gardens, which catches that water out of your drainage pipes and from your roofing systems so that it's staying and it's percolating into the soil as opposed
Okay.
to adding to the kind of the mess that we've kind of created for ourselves
Right.
in Nashville.
Sure. And of course, how much moisture the soil holds depends on what your soil is made of, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to think about that.
There's a lot of different soil types within Nashville, and we are out here technically on the Highland Rim, and there's a lot of chert, there's a lot of clay, a rock. In the Central Basin, it's a little more alkaline depending on where you live. I actually lived in an area that was maybe a bit more acidic just because it was unique and close to the Cumberland River. But yeah, there's so many getting to know what's in your soil and what you're working with and adding, I think, amendments into your soil. If it's heavy clay, if you're wanting to kind of establish a more diverse garden of plant material that likes a more kind of loamy, rich soil. That's a part that should be a part of your plan, as well as incorporating that into your home garden.
And how do we know what we have in the soil? You mentioned alkaline soil. I don't have litmus paper in my pocket. How do we know what our soil type is?
A couple ways. You can, if you have a friend who knows a little bit about plant material and what would be growing in your area, like say out here, there's a lot of sourwoods, there's blueberries, there's all of these things that indicate more acidic soil on the slopes. And then there's also limestone outcroppings where you'll see juniper because they like alkaline. But overall, if you're very curious about what you're dealing with on your property, you want to reach out to our Ag Extension Service. And that would be through UT, Ellington Ag. They do a really great job of assessing soil and various other ways of ag-related help for homeowners.
And I've seen these soil tests. There's a lot of information that, if you don't know how to navigate them, can be very intimidating. So if I were a novice gardener and I brought you that soil test, would that be helpful when we were selecting our plants? Could I bring that to you and you could help guide me towards certain types of plants that would thrive in that soil?
Sure. Oh yeah, for sure. And we focus on native plant material, and even within there are kind of specific ecosystems that certain native plants will grow in. But overall, a lot of our native plant material acclimates to the soils that we're working with, unless, there are exceptions where people move into new build homes where they've stripped all that topsoil and you're left with the subsoil. So you really do need to amend and put back in good topsoil if your contractor hasn't done it.
And what are the tools in our toolbox when it comes to amending the soil? Of course, we've seen the bags of compost in front of a garden store, but what else? What else are we working with when we are trying to line up the soil?
Yeah, it's got to be a long-term investment, and you've got to have a big picture for what you're working towards. I recommend not just going in with mulch every year, but adding more than just that. Like there's so many companies now who are focusing on soil amendments that have a lot of diversity within them, that have earthworm castings and mushroom compost, pine fines, a compost blend in and of itself. So adding as much kind of organic matter into your soil is gonna help in the long term, because a lot of people put down weeding fabric. I really don't recommend doing that because it creates this barrier between those natural microorganisms that want to be breaking down that material. It's just sitting on top, and you want the earthworms to pull all of that material down and to be able to work within it. And it's just it ends up just being more troublesome and not a good ecological way of gardening.
And of course, soil is alive. What makes soil is, of course, the organic matter and that microbiome within the soil.
Right. That's half of what the soil amendments is feeding, that microbiome.
Right. And of course, when we're selecting, let's say mulch, there's a lot of mulch with a lot of chemical additives in it. What should we look for? What should we avoid?
I would just make sure that you trust your source where you're getting it. We actually at Wonder don't offer any mulch or soil amendment at the moment.
Okay.
It's a long-term plan, but we just opened in September 15th of last year. So we're
Congratulations.
Focusing on our strengths and kind of expanding on that. Or expanding from there. So strengths being educating the public. We do a lot of kind of what we're working towards doing workshops, but just offering the native plant material that thrives in our area is high on the priority list.
Do you have a partner that you recommend who does offer some of that stuff?
There's several companies within Nashville. There's the Compost Company. There's Earth Mix.
Yeah, that's great.
Stone Tree is stone's throw from here. They have a
Nice.
lot of good product as well, National Nursery. So there's, depending on where you live in the city, just kind of reach out and contact those companies that are closer to you.
Absolutely. So let's say, okay, so we've selected our site and we've had our soil test done. There's a lot more to a garden than just sticking what you want into the ground. Coming up with a big picture is helpful. Where do you start when you are planning a garden?
You have to kind of sit down and ask yourself how much of the work that you want to do. Are you wanting to enlist someone to help you, whether that be a garden consultant or a garden designer, or a garden designer that's linked up with a landscape company to do the install work? You just have to kind of be honest with yourself about your own capabilities and your own time capacity. And the next step is also, what are your goals for your space? Or do you want, I mean, I want everybody to have a bigger focus on their yards being backyard habitats, is this new term that we're using, and habitat for wildlife and nature and insects. So I personally want that to be a goal for everybody. But do you want to have a vegetable garden? Do you want to have some fruit trees? Do you want to create more shade? Is there not enough shade in your neighborhood? You want to have some nice canopy trees? Do you want to have a living hedge? There's just so many, and maybe you don't, maybe some of the people listening to this don't even know how to ask those questions yet. And I would recommend you come talk to me at Wonder, or if you're not in this area, you find your garden center that you trust and start to have those conversations, and they'll help facilitate and get you going in the right direction.
And I think that, for me personally, a lot of what I plant is intended to attract what I like to see in my yard. We've all heard certain things you plant attract, you can plant echinacea for pollinators. What do you like as far as that goes? What's pretty for us and helpful for our invertebrate friends?
Yeah, so I focus I focus on a lot of things, but I try to educate people about host plants. So almost 50% of our insect life here in North America are Lepidoptera, which are moth and butterfly species. And so if we can help increase those numbers, overall, it's going to help our local ecosystem so much, because those invertebrates are pollinators. I mean, and aside from bees have a place too. We'll talk about those as well. But for Lepidoptera, bird food is a huge thing. If it's such a big chunk, we need to really be thinking about what we're putting into our yards and who it's supporting. So we'll say goldenrod, solidago, which gets a really bad rap. Everybody thinks that's ragweed, and it's different. That's not what it doesn't give us. I mean, it doesn't ignite our allergies like we think it does. It's something different, but it hosts 90 Lepidoptera species, which is the most of any perennial. So and a lot of people are calling it a keystone plant. And there's a lot of species that are native to Tennessee, and I am selling as many of them as I possibly can, because they offer so much. In the fall, when they're in bloom, there's just covered in all kinds of pollinators. Soldier beetles are all over it. Smaller insects are going to town. It's a party on the goldenrod. So yeah, and even within that genus, there's sun and shade loving. There's some for the woodland, some for the meadow.
When designing a garden, I think in terms of design elements myself. You have your walls, you have your decor. You've got some kind of hedge that maybe partitions off. What would you like as a barrier plant, as kind of a hedge that would also be a beneficial habitat? Do you have specific, like back in Tennessee, I had crepe myrtle, for example. What do you like as far as that element goes?
Yeah, so I would recommend, there's several. If you're wanting a mid-sized tree like a crepe myrtle, I would go with serviceberry, or fringe tree would be another great option. Viburnums, there's a lot of native viburnums that create nice hedges. If you're in a more shaded woodland area, you have so much of our plant material that would be within that 7 to 15 foot range is an understory tree or shrub. So calycanthus would be another great option. And we have native evergreens aren't as prevalent, but they do exist. So Yopon holly, I've been promoting as a hedge plant especially with, so in 2 years ago, we had something called a flash freeze where it decimated so many of our evergreens because they weren't ready for it. We had such a drop in temperature so fast. They hadn't gone to their complete dormancy. It was on Christmas Day. That so much was lost. And I saw it as a great opportunity to educate people on native evergreens to go in place of those skip laurels or whatever. Some hollies were lost. But we have Yopon holly as a great substitution for the boxwoods that were lost. And we have Alyssium is a great substitution for skip laurels in shade. And we also have Carolina laurel, which is a native laurel that we could be putting in as that living hedge. Because another big topic a lot of people talk about in the garden center scene anyway is Nashville's growing so fast and buildings are going up, within a blink of an eye, and people are losing their privacy. So that's a big topic for a lot of people. And I really want to be able to offer those native alternatives to them.
Yeah, that freeze killed it killed a tree of mine back home, unfortunately. Magnolia.
Mm-hmm.
I was about to ask too, while we're on this topic of those kind of barrier plants. Chris mentioned crepe myrtles, and of course we've got the Bradford pears as another problematic tree. But a crepe myrtle, what do you think about those? They're not native to this area, so they're kind of a non-native species to some degree. And of course, magnolias aren't either. So those were trees that were affected quite a bit by that snap freeze. My magnolia barely made it through. But just kind of, what trees should we be avoiding that are kind of popular,
Yeah, I think crepe myrtles are pretty overused. I'm not a natives only person. Like next door, we've got some seasonal color. We'll carry figs, that kind of thing. But it's what we should be avoiding are the things that have already been identified as invasive species or having invasive properties, like Nandina domestica. They're promoting these non-fruiting Nandina, but it's just kind of, at what point do we just let go and move on to something that's more beneficial to the environment around us? I personally am kind of on a mission to promote native ground cover, because a lot of the ground cover that's available in retail garden centers is invasive species. Like, it's actually on the established lists. So English ivy and vinca would be another one. Pachysandra is getting close to being an invasive species. It's just kind of really rethinking the things that we've been told that we should put in our yards and think about what can we be putting in that's more beneficial. So crepe myrtles they do sucker. So I don't love them for that, because they kind of can take over a space, but they don't really offer anything to the wildlife other than maybe perhaps a little bit of shelter. But yeah, we have a lot of, like, redbud. I mean, they don't bloom at the same time, but they're a nice sun-loving small tree that you could put in instead.
When it comes to flower beds, we've got a lot of different options, including perennials, annuals, biennials. What role do each of these play in a flower bed?
I do a little bit with annuals, more so. There's a phrase I like to say as kind of an invitation to homeowners who are not very familiar with native plants or are trying to move in that direction, is I think that there's still a place for annuals, because they're the ones that are inviting the pollinators in. They've got those bright colors, and if you've got a stand of zinnias, they're just going to be covered in butterflies. And so when you plant those annuals, the pollinators are coming in, but when you plant the native plants and the host plants and all that, you're inviting them to stay.
Right.
And so it's this kind of a change of a paradigm.
Mhm.
We call it kind of the paradigm shift of we've been kind of gardening a certain way and we have a tendency to like things that are foreign, that are
Mhm.
rare and unusual and hard to find. And I'm guilty of it as well. I had a Japanese maple collection at my old house. But as I've learned more, I've challenged myself to really let go of some of that fascination and that collector in me. And I start collecting other like native plants. I different types of solidago and joe pye weed and different cone flowers. And there's a really great organization up in Pennsylvania, close to actually the Pennsylvania Delaware line. It's called Mount Cuba Center, and they do trials that not only look into the garden performance of plants, but also their pollinator value.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Yeah, there was something else I wanted to ask you. So you've mentioned that some species are considered invasive. Now, are all non-native species considered invasive, or is there another criterion for invasive species? So
No, the criteria is if they, and I'm probably going to butcher this because I'm sure there's better words, but it's the properties of them self-seed or reseeding and taking over our natural areas. So Bradford pear, like
Right.
Tony mentioned, it's showing very invasive properties because it's not, and it was actually promoted in the horticulture world at first as being sterile.
Yeah.
And that's why I worry about, like, there's another butterfly bush is another one that's showing invasive properties. It's popping up in our wild spaces, and they're coming out with sterile types. But they're never completely sterile. There's always a percentage. And it makes me think of Jurassic Park, where he's like,
That's right.
life finds a way.
That's right.
So if we're having to bend the rules and try to like hope that it's not, why not just go in with a New Jersey tea instead? Or, Agastache, something that's gonna bring in as many pollinators, but has better, things to offer overall. What was the winter creeper is another really awful ground cover that we should stop selling, and really should be illegal if that's what it takes, because it climbs trees and it suffocates them, and it'll kill trees.
It'll kill the trees.
Mm-hmm.
What should we plant instead?
Oh, well, that's another thing, is we have to redefine or ask ourselves what our expectations are for a plant. Because oftentimes when people are describing what they want a ground cover to be and to do, they're describing an invasive species. They want it to take over, to fill a whole space, they want it to be cheap. And it's like, well, but we have a lot of native sedges, and there's more gaining traction, and more people are growing them, that make great alternatives to both turf and ground cover, because they reseed as well, so they'll cover a nice little space. One of my favorites is blue wood sedge, because it has a nice blue hue to it. There's Pennsylvania sedge is another really great one. We've got a lot of native violets that you could be planting. There's a perennial called green and gold, which is used as a ground cover that we have plenty of at Wonder. So there's just more and more options coming out, because people like me are trying to promote these native alternatives, so that we're planting less of these invasive species.
I sometimes kind of think, when we talk about invasive species, that a lot of like towns and municipalities kind of have policies stacked in favor, or I guess not in favor for the invasive, or in favor of the invasive species rather. When we think about mowing criteria and the types of ground covers that are acceptable in communities and stuff like that, what do you think should be done to kind of educate communities to change their ways on what types of things should be acceptable for planting? Like right now in Kingston Springs, for instance, we're doing a no-mow April.
Mm-hmm.
The idea, of course, for the pollinators and keeping those native plants to up for them right during the season when they're needed. So what are you doing, and what kind of things should be done to maybe educate communities and community leaders to change policies to be more accepting towards native species?
Yeah, it's really just those of us who know the benefits, putting ourselves out there and doing just that, of talking to municipalities. And there's a big conversation going on right now in the native plant world with HOAs, because there was a big battle in Delaware where there was a couple that had a very kind of native plant focused yard that they got into it and got into legal issues because their neighbor was complaining that it was wild and unkempt and all this jazz. And well, they ended up winning, and it set a precedent for a national precedent. Like, HOAs don't always get to win. Like, we have to change our, and it doesn't mean that we'll get rid of all the lawns, but we could have a lot less of a lawn in our lives and in our yards. And it's just, and it's going to be a really slow journey towards us all collectively doing better. Even within the native plant world, there's this level of impatience, and we can't allow ourselves to get there, because it's going to be slow. Like, I enjoy working in a retail environment where I get to have these conversations every day, and I get to see light bulbs, and I get, it's not political. It's just, how can we enjoy the space around us and understand the ecosystem and the insect species and all of these things that have been living around us, and how do we help them succeed, and how do we change the way we garden so that we can live better amongst them and have healthier ecosystems. I don't know if I fully answered that, but that's my strategy, is just to have these conversations and to use the knowledge that I have to speak to groups. And the master gardeners are doing a great job, and their minds are shifting towards being more native focused. And there's Wild Ones is another, like, they have chapters all over the United States, and they're doing really good work. And so yeah, it's just a really slow collective movement to do better.
I think it's just important, and I'm glad you said that, because in one of my other hats, of course, being a mayor, I deal with a lot of codes issues, and when we think about codes, they're really all based in like the 1950s and 60s, and even further back,
Yeah.
and they're all kind of in the let's have a white picket fence and some grass in the yard and plant a couple shrubs, and that's it. And then, of course, we enforce those same standards, and it leaves out a lot of room for native species. And I feel like it probably eliminates a lot of native species in the process too. And
yeah, I was able to work with the Mill Creek Watershed Association a couple years ago with the city of Nolensville. They won a building blocks program with the EPA to work on, because Mill Creek was so affected by the 2010 flood. And so they've been working towards making Nolensville more, just to have a better plan for flooding in the future. And I was tasked with looking over the existing plant list and beefing it up, giving them a lot more options for riparian zone buffer plants that were native. And it was an outdated list. Like, they had crepe myrtle on there as native. And I was shocked. I was like, but at the same time, I was honored, because I got to be a part of that change, and Tony, you get to be a part of the change with, updating those systems.
We talked about pollinators a bit, and I love the pollinators. I also am a big fan of songbirds, attracting birds to my yard. Do you have any suggestions as to what they like? What should we consider when we're putting something in for our feathered friends?
Yes. So the three main things that people talk about for supporting birds: birds need food, birds need shelter, and birds need water. So food, you've got, seeds, nuts, and berries that birds eat. and they're available at different times. There's, as far as berries, you've got summer producing berries like blueberries. Service berry produces in June. Those actually have more protein content because the birds that are eating them at that moment need more protein, because a lot of them are fledglings, and that's just kind of that pocket of time. But in the fall, a lot of our native species plants are producing berries that are high in fat content, and that helps both our overwintering birds kind of stock up, get ready for the winter, or for our migratory birds. That a lot of them have 50% or more of that fat content, whereas a lot of our non-native species have, less than 1%. And it's less because there's so many unique relationships that exist within nature where we're learning more about them, of course, like we have migratory birds, those plants, they've all evolved together. So, and then we have the winter producing berries that have less fat, but that just means that they don't spoil as easily. So they tend to stay on the plants a little bit longer, but they're there when the birds need them. You mentioned coneflower. That's a really good seed source for birds, specifically goldfinch. They go crazy over those seeds, and other songbirds. Nuts, you can be planting, like we have next door American beech. Those are like bigger birds like blue jays and crows and turkeys will eat beech nuts and stow them away, sometimes forget, and then those become seedlings. And then also we talked about Lepidoptera. That's food for birds. So beefing up our plant material, making it more diverse so it's supporting a larger amount of insect life will aid in feeding our birds too. Because a lot of in the spring when the birds are breeding and then they have little babies, the babies are eating insects. They're not, rarely are they being fed anything fruiting. It's insects. So that's that. And, part of the no-mow April and May has to do with allowing all of these insects to hatch and to start their life cycles. Because when we mow, we're interrupting that whole cycle. And then shelter. Yeah. So I talk a lot about the woodland, different layers of the woodland forest, and all of those matter to birds. So you've got the canopy layer where some birds prefer to roost up there, and then understory, shrub, and ground layer. And all of those, like our eastern towhees, you always find them on the ground layer. If you hear scratching in the woods, it's either going to be a chipmunk, a squirrel, or a towhee. And you kind of get used to that specific sound that towhee's making, and it's kind of as a growing birder, I'm proud of myself for knowing that sound, And then shelter also, that's where our native evergreens come into play. So our eastern red cedars, our evergreen magnolias are a great shelter for birds. And then that offers year-round shelter for them. And then water, if you don't have the money to install a big pond or whatever, bird baths are great.
Sure.
And that kind of thing. And just allowing that source for them in your own backyard habitat.
So you've mentioned obviously birds rely on insects, as a main food source, and a big problem. A lot of people, they overuse pesticides, and there are pest resistant plants, I should say, and other things that we can do that would naturally keep those pests under control without dousing our garden in a bunch of chemicals. Do you have some thoughts on that?
So I would rather say another woman's name who's way more of an expert than me, and she just did a TED Talk. Her name is Rebecca McMacken. And she talks a lot about how I watched a video of hers recently about different species of ticks and where you'll find them. And if you just avoid those areas of your yard, you'll have a lot less encounters. And also that a lot of these, and I don't really love talking about this, but I'm gonna anyway, is the mosquito spray. Like there's all of these companies are saying that they're natural and that it's organic and all this jazz, but they're not specifically targeting just mosquitoes.
Right.
It's not, though it could be an organic product. That doesn't mean, like snake venom, that's organic, but you don't want to drink it. It's dangerous, and so it's all these insecticides that are being used. It's from a chrysanthemum. It's a synthetic version of a chrysanthemum flower, and it's non-selective. It's going to affect the other insect life in your yard as well.
Right.
And that is as professional sounding as I possibly can on that topic. But there's so much research going on, and so many good conversations going on around pesticide use, and just use as little as possible. Like it's just what I do know is that the more we learn about pesticide use, the more the more we learn how detrimental it is.
Yeah.
So if you don't have to use it, don't use it. There are exceptions, if we're trying to, even herbicides are used in controlling invasive species. Like there's a place, but you have to be responsible about your use and do it the correct way, and make sure that there's no runoff, and do it at the right time. There's just we as humans have a responsibility to do these things the right way and to not cause harm.
My next question for you, we talked a lot about food and habitat for wildlife, but of course we also eat. So you said you guys have some fruit trees. What are your favorite fruit trees for us?
I love figs. You can't pull them off up there, I don't think. Maybe Chicago Hardy.
I've got a Chicago Hardy in
Okay.
that I wrapped it last winter. It's still, everything above ground died. I'm waiting to see what comes back up. So I'm trying.
And even for us, I actually do have one called Panache that I have in a container that I overwintered in the greenhouse, but it's especially not going to survive out here in Cheatham County. Maybe in Davidson County, in a very nice little microclimate.
Right.
But overall, it's Chicago Hardy and brown turkey are the pigs that we'll carry. And when we can source them, I want to have some cedar blight resistant and cedar apple rust resistant apples, because that's a big issue that we have here. We have a lot of native fruit trees like pawpaws. It takes a little nuance to make that a successful endeavor, but it's not impossible. Service berries we can eat along with the birds, but good luck. Yep. We carry blueberries, and those are native. We also have some hybrid hazelnuts. And we'll build on the edible selection for fruit trees anyway. It's going to be a slow go because we're so restricted on space that my priority is native plants, but you're right. Like I am very passionate about food security and being able to grow our own food and to understand that whole process. So we actually today just got in a shipment of annuals that had a lot of vegetables on the racks. So tons of tomatoes, both heirloom and some hybrids, peppers, watermelon, squash, and then a ton of herbs.
Nice.
Talk a little bit about pawpaws, because this is something Joy has been my Joy has been pressing us to do a little bit more in our yard, and the difficulties. I believe you have to have multiples of them, I know, but what are the specifics on making pawpaws happen in your home garden?
Love. It's like I've gotten into arguments about not arguments, but we get a little heated about how pawpaws actually get pollinated. So overall, you need genetically different pawpaws in the same area to cross-pollinate, but it's not like boom, like they're just going to be so prolific. But if oftentimes in a grove, they're all genetically the same, and so they're not compatible. And then it'll go as far as like the males open up before the females. And then, so you need a genetically different one so that the timing is just right. But basically without knowing all of that, just if you want to have your own pawpaw patch, source different pawpaws from different places, or like I try to bring them in from different places so I can say, you know, this pawpaw came from this grower, this pawpaw came from this grower. They're going to be genetically different. So you want to pair these. And then, I mean, the way the industry is going, there's so much cultivars are becoming more of a thing to get pawpaws that are more prolific or they taste a certain way and all that jazz. And I don't have any of that yet, but I look forward to having those because it's fun. Pawpaws are fun in general. Does that answer your question? You need genetically different ones. They're not male or female. They have to be genetically different.
Genetically different. Most of my pawpaw sourcing comes from the places I know where they exist in parks. So and I pick them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're in bloom right now on the property. I would like to talk a little bit more about the pawpaw because there's a lot of interesting facts that revolve around the pawpaw. Lewis and Clark would have died, but on their way back in Missouri, found a pawpaw patch and it saved them. And also, the seeds of pawpaw can be used as a natural insecticide for treating hair lice. So that's unique and interesting, and hopefully I'll never have to do that. Pawpaws, like a lot of our native seeds, have to be processed through animals. So oftentimes, like you'll see pawpaws start to grow underneath canopy trees, or like where it's obvious that a raccoon climbed up into this branch and, you know, processed it, pooped it out. And so that, you know, that's where that seed landed and it germinated. And I wish that I could have a pet possum for that very reason, so that it can process my pawpaw seeds and persimmon seeds. So that's one of my life goals.
Nice.
I think that's one of my wife's life goals as well, but just because she wants to pet the possum. So
okay, I already have a name for my possum. Her name's going to be Sassy.
That's great.
I guess that's all I have to say about pawpaws.
Yeah,
that's good.
No, that's great. So I guess kind of my last question is, you know, obviously it depends on what you want to do, but you know, how much time do you think a garden requires? How much time should we budget if we want to have a nice, healthy native garden?
Well, that's a tricky. Most people who get into this style and way of gardening end up doing more and more of it. It becomes almost therapy, because not only it's not work when you're realizing that there's a caterpillar growing on your spice bush and you get to show your kid, like your kid, that you know, you planted that tree, that shrub, so that caterpillar could magically appear, and it did. And to see, you know, all of the wildlife that comes into your yard when you're planting coneflower, and you see a species of butterfly you've never seen before, and you're just you get hooked, because I think there's something within us that we naturally want to have that connection with nature, and this world of ecological gardening. And that was my main motivation for calling the garden center a wonder, is I want people to feel that wonder for nature again, that awe. Our logo is a cecropia moth. And the first time I saw a cecropia moth, I was just like, there's no way. Like, what is this thing? Like, how is this even possible? It's so big, so fluffy. And I'm just awestruck because of this butterfly, or this moth I've never seen before. Wow. So time-wise, I mean, that's again like where you have to be honest with yourself and know your capacity. And if you have expendable income, you can hire a gardener who's gonna assist you in that. And there's different levels of like I have a friend whose company is the Garden Buddy, and she kind of just she helps you, but she doesn't always have to help you. You know, it's not like she's just there if you need her.
Sure. And also, I think the kind of gardening you're talking about too, you know, when we're talking about working with more native species and that kind of thing, you know, some of the work is being done for you by the fact that you're working with native species. You're not trying to make things grow where they aren't really supposed to be growing. So
Right.
that probably alleviates some of that time factor. And I also just really love the way you put that, because it's the same reason I get people out hiking and running, is because I want them to go out and see nature.
Sure.
And this is such a really good way to think about people that maybe don't want to go outside their home. Well, they've got an entire backyard possibly of possibilities there. And when we embrace those native species and that sort of thing, it just brings it all together, which is great.
Yeah, I heard a quote recently by a lady named Margaret Wrinkle, who's an author, and she has a New York Times column. We are motivated to save the things we love. And so if I can get people to love nature and to love being outside and to being a part of that ecosystem, like we're a part of it too. And if we can feel that love, then we're hooked, we're invested. We want to make it more healthy.
And is there anything more relaxing than a beautifully put together outdoor living space? I mean, it's just so peaceful.
Yeah, and to hear the songbirds and to, a lot of people say that the more they get into native gardening, the less they really, I mean, they want to do, but then you realize all of these relationships that are happening, like they stop worrying about aphids because they see all these ladybugs that are laying their eggs, and then the larvae eat the aphids. Like that's a food source for them. And the lacewing also lay their eggs, and that's their food source too. So it's really just it's a combination of work and observation. And the observation part is it's therapeutic. It makes you feel. I personally have found that it has made my stress levels go down. I've made other, we're on a health podcast.
That's right.
I've made a lot of, I have a lot more to do, but the choices that I've made in the past 3 years to be healthier have made a big difference. And one of them is this passion that has turned into business of teaching people and educating people about the importance of native plants and how it benefits us too.
And when people are planting the garden, if they do want to focus on native plants, where can they find you, both online and physically?
Yeah, so physically, we are next door to DATCO where we're recording. It is 1114 Highway 70 in Kingston Springs. And we are Wonder Gift and Garden. There's also a deli on the same property. So Friday through Sunday, you can get tea and lunch. And then for our online presence, we don't have a website yet. That's hopefully going to be in the works this summer. I tried to make it happen this winter and it didn't happen, but it will. But for now, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram, and it's Wonder Gift and Garden.
And I will add to that it's a property called The Land. If you are familiar with that, it's a wonderful place to go where her garden center is located. Like you said, there's great food there and all that kind of stuff, but also it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful place to be, and it's a really nice garden center. It's the kind of place you aren't going to just go, and buy some plants and leave. You're going to go there. You're going to hang out a while. You're going to talk to Joy. She's going to tell you all kinds of great information about what you should be growing in your yard. And so I highly recommend going over there.
And we're close to hiking trails.
All the better.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, and best of luck with the garden.
Thank you. I have really enjoyed talking to you both.